What's up guys, I'm Dean and welcome back to my YouTube channel. A few weeks ago I tried something new where I talked about the entire cinematic history of the Fantastic Four, and I really enjoyed researching that video and I really enjoyed editing it, and it seemed like you guys enjoyed watching it. So I thought I'd try it with something a bit more relevant. The point of this series is that sometimes what's going on behind the scenes is just as interesting as what's going on the screen, and as Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is coming out this week, I thought I'd talk about their entire cinematic journey because I think it is quite interesting and it is quite unique. So here it is, the entire cinematic journey of the Guardians of the Galaxy from their comic inception to their third and final film. Let's get into it. The Guardians of the Galaxy were made in 1969 by Roy Thomas, Arnold Drake, and Gene Colan. The original Adventures of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the comics took place in the 31st century, and it's a very different team to what we're used to now. There was Major Vance, Astro, and Astronaut from the modern day, Charlie 27 and Martinex, who both briefly appear in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and finally, the character that's most familiar to us, Yondu. This team appeared in one single comic in 1969 and then didn't appear for another 5 years because they just weren't really popular at all. When they returned, though, they added Starhawk to their roster, who is the character that Sylvester Stallone plays in the Guardians of the Galaxy films. They were slightly more popular when they were re-released, though, and this time they were given their own title, but it only lasted 2 years with 10 issues, and they were cancelled in 1978. The original team came back in 1990, and this time they were much more popular. They got their own title again, and they lasted 62 issues until 1995. They were once again cancelled then, but this is still a very different team to what we'd recognise now. In 2008, though, Dan Abnett and Andy Lange wanted to bring together a bunch of cosmic B-listers from the Marvel Universe and form them into a team, but instead of creating a new team, they thought they would just use the same name of a team that had already been before, hence was born the Guardians of the Galaxy we now recognise. This team consisted of Star-Lord, Gamora, Drax, Mantis, Rocket Raccoon, Groot, Adam Warlock, Quasar, and Cosmo the Space Dog. And despite this series being quite well critically received, it was cancelled after 2 years and only got 25 issues. So once again, the Guardians of the Galaxy aren't even doing well in the comic book world, but this 25 issue run was enough. Screenwriter Nicole Perlman loved this comic book run, and she started writing a script for a Guardians of the Galaxy film in 2009. And Kevin Feige was a fan of this script because he knew that Marvel had to expand the cosmic side of their universe before Thanos arrived. Kevin Feige briefly mentioned that Guardians of the Galaxy film was in the works at San Diego Comic-Con in 2010, and the film was officially announced at 2012 San Diego Comic-Con with 2 pieces of concept art released. A few months later, James Gunn was announced as the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, and the only contender that was named to also perhaps direct this film was Peyton Reed, who later went on to direct the Ant-Man trilogy. Which is weird, because when I talked about the Fantastic Four films, he also wanted to direct 2 of them, about 15 years apart from each other. And the only reason he got the Ant-Man films was because Edgar Wright stepped down, so he just seems to be getting all of the superhero sloppy seconds. This is going off topic, let's get back to the point. James Gunn was a pretty small name when he was announced to direct Guardians of the Galaxy. He began as a screenwriter in 1990, and by the time that he was announced on Guardians of the Galaxy, he had directed 2 films of his own, being Slither and Super. James Gunn claims that he rewrote practically the entirety of Nicole Perlman's Guardians of the Galaxy script. He said he changed the villain, changed character arcs, added more humour, and added the iconic Walkman. He also made the movie weirder, which was the advice from Joss Whedon after Joss Whedon had read the script to consult on it for him. Nicole Perlman disputes the extent of Gunn's rewrites, though, and said that he had just bumped up the humour and added some characters and deepened the scenes. Who is right? Who knows? But what we know for sure is they both got a co-writing credit on the movie despite never working collaboratively on it together. Casting was announced in the early months of 2013, which is also when they filmed this movie. Let's go through these characters one by one, talk about why they were cast and also the origin of the characters they're portraying. Star-Lord is clearly seen as the main character in this first film, and he was introduced in Marvel Previews issue 4 in 1976. He made sporadic appearances over the next decade or so, but was definitely a much more obscure hero. Some of the early contenders for Star-Lord were Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Eddie Redmayne, and Zachary Levi. Gunn's favourite choice, though, was Glenn Howerton from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and he didn't even want to give Chris Pratt an audition. Sarah Finn, his casting director, talked him into letting Pratt audition, and although Pratt only auditioned for 30 seconds, Gunn was enamoured by it. Pratt was not in the superhero shape at the time, and Gunn wanted to hire him so much that he was willing to CGI on a six-pack. That wasn't needed though, as Chris Pratt committed to working out and lost more than 60 pounds in preparation for this role. It's also worth noting that in the comics, Star-Lord is the son of a space prince called Jason, whatever, and this was in the original Nicole Perlman script, but James Gunn removed it. Gamora was introduced in 1975 and would appear every now and then throughout the next decades, always either with her father Thanos or with Adam Warlock. Amanda Seyfried was first offered the role of Gamora, but she declined because she didn't want to spend so much time in makeup every day and she wasn't convinced the film was going to be any good. Having said, who wants to see a film about a talking raccoon and a talking tree? She did later admit she was wrong, as everyone sees. Instead, Zoe Saldana signed on. Drax the Destroyer was first introduced in the pages of The Invincible Iron Man issue 55 in 1973. He didn't appear much until the 21st century, but most of the times he did appear leading up to that he was killed and just later came back to life with no explanation. Jason Momoa was in the runnings to play Drax, but Dave Bautista was later of course cast. This was his first acting role ever, as he was a professional wrestler, and as we will see as we go along, he has stayed eternally grateful for James Gunn for that. Rocket Raccoon was introduced first in the pages of Marvel Preview, issue 7 in 1976, as a reference to the Beatles song Rocky Raccoon. If you haven't heard that song, go listen to it because it's really good. There was a rumour going around at the time that Adam Sandler was going to be cast as Rocket Raccoon, which I think would have worked, but this was completely false and James Gunn confirmed it was made up. And of course, Bradley Cooper was signed on to play Rocket Raccoon, with Sean Gunn, James Gunn's brother, and also the guy who plays Kraglin in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, doing the motion capture for Rocket. At the time, an unnamed Marvel executive complained about Cooper's performance in the film, as they didn't see the point of hiring if you can't tell it was Bradley Cooper. Groot was first introduced in Tales to Astonish issue 13 in 1960 and is the only character in this list to be invented by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. Before becoming a part of the Guardians of the Galaxy in 2008, he only had 2 other appearances before then, one with the Hulk and one with Spider-Man. Vin Diesel was cast as the voice of Groot, and once again the motion capture was captured by Sean Gunn, James Gunn, and even Vin Diesel himself. Nebula was first introduced in the Avengers issue 257 in 1985 as a supervillain and appeared in major storylines such as the Infinity Gauntlet in major ways. She didn't join the Guardians in 2008 when the title was relaunched, but just like in the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, she isn't a member of the team and instead an enemy. Karen Gillan plays Gamora, and to begin with she had to shave her head for these films, but later on managed to negotiate that she could just wear a bald cap and spend a bit more time in makeup because she didn't like being bald. She also nearly played Nebula with a Scottish accent until James Gunn on her first day gave her the direction to try and speak like Marilyn Monroe, which I think is a really interesting approach to this character. Yondu was in the original Guardians of the Galaxy team, as I said, and was played by Michael Rooker, who is a lifelong friend of James Gunn, and I think that's everyone. Music is such an iconic part of these films, and like I said, this was James Gunn's addition as he was rewriting the script. He made a playlist of hundreds of relevant songs from the era, and when he'd write scenes, he'd sometimes have to listen through this playlist to find a song that fit, or he'd find a song that he liked and write an entire scene around that. It's also interesting to note that this is a very pivotal film in the story of the MCU because it's the first film where the Infinity Stones are directly referenced, and it's also the first film to have Josh Brolin appear as Thanos, something that James Gunn struggled to write into the film in a satisfying way. Another fun fact about Guardians of the Galaxy, the first film, is that this film has the most on-screen deaths of any film ever, with over 83,000 deaths, and that's in that final battle mostly in this film. Like I said, in the build-up to this film, many expected it to be Marvel's first flop, and it was released in July 2014, and it definitely was not a flop. It made over $750 million in the box office at the time, making it the third highest MCU movie up to that point, just behind The Avengers and Iron Man 3. Months after the release of the first film, a sequel was announced and James Gunn was back on to direct, and this time he would write the entire script by himself. In early drafts, Adam Warlock was set to appear, but this was removed because it was making the film too busy, and also there were rumours that Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel and Nova would appear, but James Gunn said these were never options for him because he felt it was important that Star-Lord is the only Earthling on the team. Mantis was introduced though, and she was first introduced in the comics in 1973 in the Avengers issue 112, and traditionally she's more of an Avenger than she is a Guardian of the Galaxy. She was also the bride of Kang at one point, and bizarrely even appeared in a Justice League comic under the name of Willow, but that's a long story. Pom Klementieff was cast as Mantis early into the production of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The soundtrack to this film was released in August 2017, and I think it's a better soundtrack than the first one. I don't know if that's a controversial take or not. This soundtrack had a song from a band called Alotta Haynes Jeremiah called Lakeshore Drive, which has quite an interesting story behind it. When the song was released in 1971, it was described as just a regional hit. It didn't get very popular nationally, and the band say it kind of just faded into obscurity. And when Guardians of the Galaxy 2 came out, only one member of the band was still alive. His name was Skip Haynes, and he was overjoyed to see his song finally reach the mainstream and finally be known worldwide. He died a few months after the release of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, sadly, but he did get to see the effect his song had on the world after that, which I just think is a really cute story. The film was released in April 2017 and was just as critically well received for the most part as the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, and made a lot of money with over $860 million. In 2016 though, a whole year before Guardians of the Galaxy 2 came out, Kevin Feige did reveal they were working on a Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and James Gunn did say he was happy to come back for that. It wasn't until the release of the second film though that both Kevin Feige and James Gunn officially announced that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was happening. From the outset, all the way back in 2017, James Gunn promised that this would wrap up the story of this team of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And also, a few months before Guardians 3 was officially announced, it was also announced that the Guardians would appear in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Interestingly, despite these characters being completely reinvented by James Gunn, he didn't have any influence over what happened to these characters in the Avengers films. He recently said that he would have personally had Star-Lord kill Gamora without hesitation when he was asked to, and he also said that he wouldn't have had Star-Lord punch Thanos in that fatal scene. Despite his lack of influence over the story in the two Guardians films though, he did help write some of the Guardians' dialogue throughout both films. When Avengers Endgame ended, he said he was quite unhappy that the Guardians were stuck with Thor because he had zero plans to include Thor in his Guardians of the Galaxy 3 movie, so he said he was very happy that Taika Waititi used the Guardians in his film rather than him having to use Thor in the Guardians films. James Gunn did have bigger things to worry about though, rather than how his characters would act in other films. In July 2018, Disney and Marvel fired James Gunn. Because James Gunn had spoken up against Trump, he had gotten into an argument with some conservative commentators on Twitter, and these conservative commentators released some pretty horrific tweets of James Gunn from 2008-2009. These were jokes about pedophilia and rape, so I'm not going to show them here for this reason. They were pretty disgusting. But in Gunn's defense, these jokes were a decade old, and he had apologised repeatedly since then for making those sort of jokes. Tens of thousands of fans signed petitions to see Gunn return, but most impressively, his entire cast came and backed him up on this. Dave Bautista specifically said he wouldn't work for Marvel again if they didn't rehire James Gunn, which means he'd be breaking contract and he could have been blacklisted from all of Hollywood. The cast wrote an open letter to Marvel though, and it was signed by every single cast member in the core Guardians team, and this is what the letter says. To our fans and friends, we fully support James Gunn. We were all shocked by his abrupt firing last week and have intentionally waited these 10 days to respond in order to think, pray, listen and discuss. In that time, we've been encouraged by the outpouring of support from fans and members of the media who wish to see James reinstated as the director of Volume 3, as well as discouraged by those so easily duped into believing the many outlandish conspiracy theories surrounding him. Being in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies has been a great honour in each of our lives. We cannot let this moment pass without expressing our love, support and gratitude for James. We are not here to defend his jokes of many years ago, but rather to share our experience having spent many years together on set making Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2. The character he has shown in the wake of his firing is consistent with the man he was every day on set, and his apology, now and from years ago when first addressing these remarks, we believe is from the heart. A heart we all know, trust and love. In casting each of us to help him tell the story of misfits who find a redemption, he changed our lives forever. We believe the theme of redemption has never been more relevant than now. Each of us look forward to working with our friend James again in the future. His story isn't over, not by a long shot. There is a little due process in the court of public opinion. James is likely not the last good person to be put on trial. Given the growing political divide in this country, it's safe to say instances like this will continue, although we hope Americans from across the political spectrum can ease up on the character assassinations and stop weaponizing mob mentality. It is our hope that what has transpired can serve as an example for all of us to realise that the enormous responsibility we have to ourselves and to each other regarding the use of our written words when we etch them in the digital stone. That we as a society may learn from this experience and in the future will think twice before we decide what we want to express, and in so learning perhaps can harness this capability to help and heal instead of hurting each other. Thank you for taking the time to read our words, the Guardians of the Galaxy. I really think this is really sweet to see how all these actors side with James Gunn and say how much of a great guy he is. Obviously, what James Gunn did back in 2008 and 2009 was vile, but the court of public opinion was almost entirely on his side in this one, because it was from so long ago, and he did already apologise back in 2010, and then he apologised again when these tweets were re-released. Marvel supposedly hadn't started looking for a director to replace him yet. If they would, it probably would have been Peyton Reed, knowing their track record. But they were ready to start filming Guardians of the Galaxy 3 soon and didn't want to wait around for too long. I should also say that even though James Gunn wasn't going to direct, they were still going to use his script he had finished for Guardians of the Galaxy 3. 3 months after he was fired, though, James Gunn was approached by DC and asked if he wanted to direct a Superman film. James Gunn said no, although obviously he is now directing a Superman film, and instead signed on for the Suicide Squad film. In the meantime, there was a lot of back and forth, supposedly, between the executives at Marvel and the suits at Disney. Apparently, the executives at Marvel wanted to rehire Gunn, while the suits of Disney refused to. This went on, and literally one day after James Gunn signed on to do the Suicide Squad, before it was announced to the public, he got a phone call from Disney asking if he wanted to return for Guardians of the Galaxy. James Gunn said, yes, of course I'd love to, but I have just signed on to do a film with DC. Kevin Feige's first question was, is it Superman? James Gunn said no, it's the Suicide Squad, and then Feige reportedly said, please make a good movie. Just make a great movie. I think it's really nice to see this less adversarial attitude between Marvel and DC than what we all expect. Gunn signed on for Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and would start filming it after he had finished on the Suicide Squad. While Disney Plus was being developed as a streaming service, Kevin Feige came up to James Gunn and supposedly asked him, is there anything from the Guardians universe you think would work well in a streaming service? And James Gunn supposedly had one idea, an idea he had while on the set of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. In 2020, Kevin Feige announced the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, a Marvel special presentation to be on Disney Plus that was written and directed entirely by James Gunn and that was going to be shot alongside Guardians of the Galaxy 3. The special was released in the Christmas season just gone in 2022, and I think it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I might have watched it like 4 times over Christmas. Back to Volume 3. At the time of recording, it is only a week away, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. Another interesting fact about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is that it uses a lot of practical effects, and it has in fact broken the world record for the most practical applications in one film. The record was previously held by The Grinch. But let's just go through some of the new characters they're introducing to the team. Adam Warlock is finally being introduced to the MCU, and he's being played by Will Poulter. The character was created by Stan Lee and first appeared in the Fantastic Four, issue 66 in 1967. In the comics, Adam Warlock is traditionally a much bigger name than any of the Guardians of the Galaxy and is often seen as an adversary for Thanos. In Volume 3, we're also getting the introduction of Cosmo the Space Dog. Technically not the introduction, because they appeared in the end credit scene of Guardians of the Galaxy. And they appeared in the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, so forget that whole introduction thing. Cosmo first appeared in a Nova comic in 2008 and has been a pretty consistent member of the team since then. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is getting great early reviews, but beyond that, not much is known about this film. One thing we know for sure, though, is that it is the finale for this team of Guardians, and both Dave Bautista and Zoe Saldana at this time have announced that this will be their last Marvel film. It will also obviously be James Gunn's final Marvel film, as he now goes over to lead DC. And the only reason that ever happened was because Disney fired him. Perhaps a new Guardians of the Galaxy team will carry the torch, but it looks like this is the end of their cinematic journey, and that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like, please comment down below your favourite member of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and please remember to subscribe for more videos like this. Also give me more suggestions of universes or movie series or stories behind the screen that you would like to see me tell on this channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.